My goal is to read On the Passion of Our Lord Jesus Christ by Saint Philaret of Chernigov. Um, Probably my goal will be to try to read at least one homily a day from this book. I'm going to mispronounce certain words that are Russian, or, well, probably certain words in general, so bear with me. This first recording is just me telling about what I'm going to be reading, but and I'll probably read the brief biography of Saint Philaret, and then I might read a homily after this and record it separately. But my plan is to hopefully, once I start getting this going, to record one a day. It's really windy outside, so I hope that noise isn't going to be too distracting in the background. If not, I'll have to find a different place to record this. Right. Well, bear with me on mispronouncing a lot of names. I might just say part of it because I'm going to really butcher a lot of these names. All right. A brief biography of Saint Philaret, Archbishop of Chernigov. Saint Philaret, Archbishop of Chernigov, in the world Dmitry Gregorovich, In the world, Dmitry Gregorovich Konobievsky was born Konobievsky. Dmitry Gregorovich Konobievsky. All right, I tried. Was born into a priest family on October 23rd, 1805, in the village of Lesnonian Konobievo of the Shatsk district in the Tambov province of Russia. On the day of his birth, when no one as yet knew of the event in the village except a local fool for Christ, Alexei the latter began to ring the church bell. When he was asked what he was ringing for, he told them about Dmitry's birth, saying that he would ring throughout all Russia. Dmitry received his early education at home. By the age of 5, he was already helping to sing in church, and his aunt was teaching him the Psalter by heart. His father, the priest Gregory, was an outstanding preacher and exemplary pastor, and his mother, Anastasia, was a model of piety. Father Gregory had the custom of gathering his family around the table, especially on long winter evenings, and reading aloud to them from the lives of the saints. The young Dmitry would listen eagerly, fascinated by the feats and labors of the saints of the church. This certainly had a great influence on his later life, when he was to publish several books on saints. At the age of 7, Dmitry was sent for further education to the Vishya monastery under the direction of Hierodeacon, later Archimandrite Nikon, the former prefect of the Ryazan seminary. He spent 2 years there, becoming acquainted with all the subjects he would later need to study. From Vishya, he entered the Shasik Theological School. Once during his summer vacation, he went with his aunt to the Sarov Hermitage, where he received the blessing of the great Saint Seraphim, who said, "This youth will be a great luminary of the church, and will be glorified throughout Russia as a learned man." When Dmitry's older brother Basil later went to ask Saint Seraphim's blessing to enter a monastery, the saint said to him, "Only your brother has been given the talent to pull a book out of his pocket every month, but you should go home and live as God shows you." While still at the school in Shatsky, Dmitry attracted the attention of Bishop Jonah of Tambov, who was present at the examinations there. Dmitry finished first in his class, and the bishop gave him a new surname, a common practice in those days. Taking into consideration Dmitri's short stature and humility, he gave the diligent seminarian the surname Glomovetsky. Dmitry then entered the Tambov seminary, where he again excelled, becoming proficient in Latin and German. He was rarely seen without a book in his hand and spent time helping the other students. In 1826, Dmitry entered the Moscow Theological Academy, where he received the following evaluation. Dmitry has distinguished himself by his meekness and humility, his strict attention to himself and to his actions, and his constantly pious state of soul, by which he has disposed himself to monasticism. On August 19th, 1829, Dmitry was tonsured a monk at the academy by Saint Philaret, Metropolitan of Moscow, who gave him his own name, thus demonstrating the favor the young man had won with him. On February 3rd, 1830, Metropolitan Philaret ordained the new monk to the diaconate, and on June 29th of the same year, he was ordained to the priesthood. The development of the young theologian took place under the watchful eye of the great Moscow hierarch. Saint Philaret's paternal care for his disciple was noticed by everyone. The Metropolitan would even give his own sermons to the young Philaret for review. A tradition has been preserved that Metropolitan Philaret was preparing Father Philaret to be his successor. Even before graduating the academy, Father Philaret was assigned as the academy's librarian, a post he retained after graduation as well. Beginning in June of 1831, he occupied the chair of church history at the academy, and was transformed to the chair of Holy Scripture the following year. Then on May 1st, 1833, in connection with his assignment to the post of inspector of the academy, he was transferred to the chair of moral and pastoral theology. In January 1835, he was raised to the rank of archimandrite, and in December of that year, he was appointed rector of the academy. In addition to his other responsibilities, which were already considerable, Archimandrite Philaret was assigned as superior of the Theophany Monastery in Moscow. The lectures of Archimandrite Philaret enjoyed great popularity. Endowed with encyclopedic knowledge, he gave an entirely new formulation to many problems of history, philosophy, and other spheres of knowledge, interesting his listeners with his apt, originally formed criticisms of opposing viewpoints. The energetic rector vigorously encouraged scholarly work within the walls of the academy. At his initiative, the academic journal, The Works of the Holy Fathers in Russian Translation with Supplements of Spiritual Content, was founded. Father Philaret's love for the Divine Liturgy was profound. From the first day that he began serving the Holy Altar right up to his death, this was abundantly evident. At each liturgy, from the beginning of the cherubic hymn to his reception of the Holy Mysteries, tears would flow from his eyes, and when he took up the lamb and recited the prayers before communion, he would break into sobs. Even after receiving communion, it would take a while for him to compose himself. On December 21st, 1841, in the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, Archimandrite Philaret was consecrated Bishop of Riga, vicar of the Pskov Diocese, and he moved there half a year later. His predecessor in Riga, Bishop Aronarchus, had been recalled due to the efforts of local Protestants, angry that the archpastor had received a great number of their co-religionists into the bosom of the Orthodox Church. Thanks to his single-minded activity, catechesis among the Livonian peasants was intensified, and the necessary Orthodox books, including service books, began to be translated into Estonian and Latvian. Bishop Philaret opened 63 new parishes and found worthy candidates for the priesthood. He succeeded in establishing schools for non-Russians in many places, and in 1847 opened a theological school in Riga, in which instruction was given in the local languages. He likewise worked for the conversion of schismatics living in the Baltic countries. It is not surprising that his activity, too, eventually aroused dissatisfaction among the local landowners, German Lutherans and Lutheran pastors. In their efforts to keep the local people from accepting the Orthodox faith, they did not stop at violence. People were starved, chased off their land, and with their whole families fired from their jobs, thrown into prison and beaten, sometimes even to death. Yet, to everyone's amazement, people could not be dissuaded from seeking entry into the church. During only 6 days in September 1845, up to 4,000 people were united to the Orthodox Church. Such zeal for Christ among the local inhabitants was greeted with fury on the part of the landowners and Protestant clergy, who began trying in every way to subject Bishop Philaret to the same fate as his predecessor, and this came to pass 3 years later to the great grief of his flock. In 1848, Bishop Philaret was transferred to the Cathedra of Kharkov. There as well he showed himself to be a tireless pastor. He expended great energy visiting all the churches in his diocese and correcting deficiencies whenever he found them. Among his many projects in the Kharkov diocese was the establishment of schools for women, which gave their students a broad education in both church-related and practical subjects. He likewise took great care for the churches and monasteries in his diocese, renovating some and completing the construction of others. During the Crimean War, Bishop Philaret took an active part in supporting the troops, giving out icons, serving mulligands, and when wounded soldiers were brought home, turning the seminary building into a hospital. During Bishop Philaret's time as Archpastor of Kharkov, several of his books were published, including historical works and collections of his sermons and teachings from his time in Riga. In 1858, the present volume of Homilies on the Lord's Passion appeared in print. Bishop Philaret had preached these 60 sermons to his flock during the period of Great Lent over the course of several years. In them he approached the gospel narratives as a historian as well as a pastor, setting them forth clearly and chronologically. Through his edifying words permeated with a spirit of sincere and heartfelt love, he provided lessons in true Christian life to people of all ages and callings. Bishop Philaret's time as Archpastor of Kharkov is filled with consolations as his time in Riga had been filled with sorrows. He was now well known all over Russia for his erudition and his activities on behalf of Orthodox enlightenment. On April 7th, 1857, in recognition of his service to the Church, the Holy Synod raised him to the rank of Archbishop and honored him by assigning him to attend the Synod's meetings. 2 years later, in April of 1859, Archbishop Philaret was transferred to the ancient see of Chernigov, where he was to spend the remainder of his life. As he had in Kharkov, Archbishop Philaret began to work with bringing the churches and monasteries in his diocese into the best possible order and by establishing higher education for women. When he saw the great need for education among the peasant population, there were only 20 government schools in the entire diocese at the time. He gathered all possible resources, both state and private, for the establishment of parish schools. These would teach children of both genders literacy in both Russian and Church Slavonic, as well as general church education. By 1862, there were 843 such schools in the diocese, taught by 923 teachers, with 15,116 male students and 2,360 female students. As always, in the midst of his many administrative duties, he still found time for his prodigious activity as a scholar and author. He would spend a portion of each winter living in the Elitz monastery, where he dedicated most of his time to writing. St. Philaret's scholarly and literary activity remains his best-known testament. His work was recognized by the Kiev Theological Academy, which awarded him the degree of Doctor of Theology in 1860. Of his 159 published works, some of the most notable in addition to the present volume are The History of the Russian Church, Homilies and Talks given in Riga, an investigation of the death of Teresterik Dmitri, Homilies and Talks of Philaret, Archbishop of Kharkov, a historical teaching on the Fathers of the Church, a survey of Russian spiritual literature from 862 to 1720, historical survey of singers and hymns of the Greek Church, Russian saints venerated by the whole Church or locally, the teaching of the evangelist John on the Word, an interpretation of the Epistle of Apostle Paul to the Galatians, Orthodox dogmatic theology, saints of the South Slavs, and holy ascetics of the Eastern Church, posthumously printed in 1871. When the eminent historian and theologian was awarded the Order of St. Alexander Nevsky in 1866, it was pointed out in the imperial mandate that his works were an adornment of the spiritual literature of the fatherland. During the last years of his life, Archbishop Philaret began to lose his physical strength. He could no longer write in a seated position, and so began to write with a trembling hand while laying down. Despite his physical limitations, he continued to put his flock first. In 1866, an epidemic of cholera broke out in Kiev and its surrounding areas, eventually making its way to the southern districts of the Chernigov province. St. Philaret decided at the time to make the rounds of his entire diocese. Those around him tried to dissuade him, but he replied, "It is now that I find my journey to be timely. Since the people have lost heart, I need to encourage them." He left the city of Chernigov on August 5th, 1866, intending to complete his travels by August 17th. After serving the Feast of the Lord's Transfiguration on August 6th in the town of Borzma, he visited 2 village churches, consecrating the second one. This was to be his last liturgy. As has been mentioned, he always served the liturgy with tears, but this time he wept unrestrainedly throughout the service. Although it soon became clear that he had become infected with cholera, he still managed to visit 6 more churches before he was forced to stop in the town of Konotop and took to his bed. Despite his intense suffering, he never ceased praying during his illness. Finally, after confession, unction, and the reading of the canon for the departure of the soul from the body, on the morning of August 9th, Archbishop Philaret departed to the Lord, whom he had served so entirely and selflessly all his life. Beginning on the following day, the saint's body was carried in procession from Konotop to Chernigov, a distance of 112 miles, all the while accompanied by over 10,000 people. During the entire procession, not a single case of cholera was reported. The epidemic ceased without reaching Chernigov. The hierarch's grieving flock laid him to rest in a vault under the altar of the Holy Trinity Church of the Holy Trinity Monastery. In 2009, by the resolution of the Holy Synod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarch, Archbishop Philaret was numbered among the locally venerated saints of the Chernigov Diocese. His commemoration days are August 9th and 22nd, of the day of his repose, and October 12th to the 25th, the day of his glorification. Source is Archimandrite Laris, Archbishop Philaret of Chernigov, on the 100th anniversary of his repose. The Orthodox Way, Jordanville, New York, Holy Trinity Monastery, 1966, pages 125 through 44.